everyone, my name is Sarah and I'm a registered clinical counselor in BC and the manager of mental wellness programs at the YMCA of Greater Vancouver. Thank you for joining me in this fourth video of the Y Wellness series. If you're tuning into these videos for the first time, I'd encourage you to go back and watch the first 3 and then come back and join this video. Y Wellness is a series of 8 short videos that focus on providing education and information from acceptance and commitment therapy, also known as ACT. In the videos so far, I've provided a general overview of ACT and focused on the 2 core concepts of connecting with the present moment and acceptance, including how these strategies from these concepts can help us when we're experiencing distress. In today's video, I'm going to focus on further fleshing out the ACT concept of diffusion. Now, it's kind of a strange word, but think of the metaphor of diffusing a bomb so that it's much less harmful. Diffusion or unhooking is a strategy when we have unhelpful thoughts. The practice of diffusion attempts to change the way that we relate or interact with our thoughts, rather than putting in energy and effort into changing the thoughts themselves. Now, you may be asking yourself, why would I want to change the way that I relate to my thoughts? The reality is, our thoughts that our mind produces tend to impact us in many different ways, including how we see ourselves and others, how we make decisions, the behaviors that we choose to engage and not engage in, and more. So when our mind produces unhelpful thoughts and we get hooked in or fused to those thoughts, we may end up making decisions that don't serve us. When we experience distress, so let's say a distressing emotion like anger, our mind produces all kinds of thoughts like, this isn't fair, I don't want to do this, I don't think what they said to me is right. And from an ACT perspective, it's not helpful to get caught up in a battle with our thoughts. Are they justified or unjustified, true, false, right, wrong, good or bad? But rather we can ask ourselves, are these thoughts helpful? If we determine in fact that these thoughts increase our distress or lead us to behaviors or decisions that we might end up regretting or that don't serve us in the long run, then we may want to call upon the strategy of diffusing from our thoughts. At this point, you may be thinking, well, why don't I just change the thoughts themselves instead of changing the way I relate to the thoughts? You can absolutely try that and see if that works for you. In my experience, I find it really hard to change or control my thoughts. It's like, when someone tells you to not think about something, like whatever you do, don't think about ice cream. Don't think about the texture of ice cream, your favorite flavor of ice cream, what it looks like, what it tastes like. All I can think about is ice cream. So when changing our thoughts doesn't work, we can try this thing called diffusion, which helps us change the way we relate to our thoughts by seeing our thoughts, as strings of words that our mind has put together and that we attribute meaning to these thoughts. Diffusion can help us create space between ourselves and our thoughts. We often don't recognize that there's a difference between ourselves and our thoughts. We think because our mind produces our thoughts, they must be true, they must be right, and we grip into them and we hold on to them really tightly. When in fact, what we can do is we can take a step back and we can notice that there's this space between ourselves and our thoughts. And this is particularly helpful again when those thoughts are distressing or overwhelming. So how do we practice diffusion? There are a number of diffusion strategies. One strategy I find useful and simple, and I've sort of already alluded to it, is to name our thoughts as thoughts. So notice the difference between I'm a bad person and I'm having the thought that I'm a bad person. My mind is trying to tell me that I'm a bad person. Instead of inhabiting this thought and getting overwhelmed by it, we can recognize that it's a thought. It's a painful thought. It doesn't feel good, and yet it is a thought. And we can recognize that this painful thought is not something that we need to grip into or hold on to super tightly, but it is a thought. Another diffusion strategy is to visualize our thoughts. We can visualize our thoughts in all kinds of ways, like leaves floating on a stream, cars passing by on a highway, or falling raindrops from the sky. And you can use anything else from your imagination to visualize your thoughts. You can take this moment to notice and to see your thoughts as floating, passing, or falling. And this allows us, again, to take that step back and notice our thoughts for what they are, thoughts. If you use the stream metaphor, you can even try taking the perspective of the water, noticing that you have all these different leaves of thoughts floating by. And you might even notice that there's particular leaves or thoughts that come up again and again. That's also known as rumination. And with this practice, every time that thought comes up, we visualize ourselves placing it on a leaf and watching it float down the stream. And we just keep repeating that, even if that thought keeps showing up for us. A third diffusion strategy is getting curious about our thoughts and approaching our thoughts like a curious scientist. We can ask ourselves questions like, where did this thought come from? How long have I had this thought for? What's going on for me when this thought comes up? Is this thought related to any other thoughts or a series of thoughts? And in this curiosity approach, we can recognize our thoughts as thoughts and maybe even identify if this thought originally came from us or if we heard it from somewhere else. We can also recognize the types of situations and emotions that might bring up certain thoughts for us, all the while recognizing and noticing our thoughts as thoughts. So to recap, the 3 diffusion strategies I mentioned are naming our thoughts as thoughts, visualizing our thoughts as floating leaves, passing cars, or falling raindrops, and approaching our thoughts with curiosity. I hope that you'll give these diffusion strategies a try on your own. And remember, when you're trying a strategy for the first time, don't pick the most distressing thought. Pick something that gives you a little bit of distress but isn't too overwhelming. And we often need to try new tools and strategies multiple times in order for them to be effective. One final note. There are times when fusing to or hooking into our thoughts is helpful. For example, we might have the thought, this is really hard, but I'm just going to keep trying. And this could be a really effective thought, in which case diffusion isn't warranted. So diffusing from or unhooking from our thoughts is only needed when the thoughts are distressing or unhelpful. Now, if diffusion isn't making complete sense to you right now, that's totally fine. You can come back to this strategy at any time, and it might even make more sense after you watch the next couple of videos in the Why Wellness series. That wraps up this video on diffusion. Stay tuned for the next video where I'll break down the ACT core concept of the observing self. My name is Sarah, and thanks for joining me.